French when I speak French, English when I speak English, sometimes English when I speak French. I'm French though. That's weird. Sometimes it's faster to just think in English rather than French, it seems. I am fluent in both Spanish and English, but I only think in English, lol. Is it your original language, or is Spanish my first language? Romanian second, German third, English my brain. Fuck your mother language, let's go with English. Does it switch around, or is it mostly just English? First language, Danish. Second language, English. Third language, German. It switches between Danish and English. Edit. Rip my inbox. Does it mix like every other words, or complete thoughts then the next is a different language? It's interesting to see so many people with English as their second or third language, and they only think in English. Interesting stuff. I think that's just due to the world we live in right now. For me, I think either in the language I'm currently engaged in, for example reading the comments on here, I don't jump back to German as I'm writing this, or in a sort of in-between state. Sometimes it's less language, and more like a series of pictures that form a coherent situation in my mind without any words in the mix. Sometimes I find myself with the question of, what language did I just think that in, and being unable to answer. After the fact you can put it into words, of course. I can think in them all. When I'm speaking a language, I think in that language even if I'm not 100% fluent. When I'm not speaking, I generally think in one of two languages I'm a native speaker in. I don't consciously control it. Sometimes I'm surrounded by one language, and my brain randomly starts thinking in the other, but usually I'll think in the language I last used. I'm currently learning Swedish, and it's gotten to the point where if I see an object the Swedish word for it pops into my head before the English word does. It's a good thing. I am trying to become fluent. I often practice a lot of Swedish to myself. I sometimes practice on my boyfriend too. He's actually Swedish, but I'm still too embarrassed to try and have a full-blown Swedish conversation with him. One day. I am a slow learner, but I'm in the long game, and if I can become at least somewhat fluent in it, I'll be happy. While I was in seminary at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, there was a professor there who was very skilled in languages. For example, he was planning a trip to Turkey to study something, and someone asked him why he was reading a book in German, and he said, the best book on some specific part of the Turkish language is written in German. There was a story that might have been urban legend, but one day he was walking across the quad, and the school president stopped him and said, Dr. Gentry, how are things going? I'm disappointed. Why? Because I know 9 languages, but can only think in 5 of them. Asterisk edited to add. School asterisk. Wow, so Erdogan himself asked him how things are going. I started off thinking in English, and then translating Spanish into English in my head. It took a lot of effort. The weirdest thing was when I started knowing words in Spanish that I didn't know in English. And then it was weird again when I started understanding Spanish words and sentences without having to consciously translate them into English first. It was like I would hear someone say something in Spanish, and the understanding of the whole meaning of the sentence would pop into my head the same way as when someone said something in English. I learned English much earlier in life, so that's my default. But if I'm hearing Spanish, or listening to Spanish music, or media, or even sometimes when I'm not, there are a lot of times when I think in Spanish, too. And honestly, I kind of prefer thinking in Spanish, but I'm not quite sure why. Maybe it's that the music is better. I'm learning Spanish, and the first time a sentence just made sense, and I didn't have to translate it in my head was pretty cool. Or when I started to just be able to say things I wanted, and not think about them. I'm Anglo, and my French is fading, but when I'm super pissed I swear in Canadian French, if only in my head. I forced myself to think in Dutch when I was learning it. It's a good way to speed up learning a language. French Canadian swear words are the best and most effective IMO. I speak Portuguese, English, Spanish, and German. In my house multiple languages were spoken in a mix at all times. Words in sentence weren't exactly from the same language. When I speak with my family like that, I think in no language in particular, and it's second nature. When just speaking a single language at a time, I typically think in that language. When it comes to counting, it's mostly German. My first language is English, and second is French. I'm currently attempting to learn German, but every time I get stuck or can't think of the right German word, I start thinking in French. And I don't even speak French that well. My first language is Swedish, but I'm fluent in English, and pretty much only speak English at home. I can also understand Danish and Norwegian and speak a bit of French. I mostly think and dream in English unless I've been speaking/reading a lot of Swedish, or if I'm doing stuff where my vocabulary is lacking in English. I knew it, Scandinavians know a lot of languages. My first language is Portuguese, and I can speak a little bit of Spanish, and I'm fluent in English. I'm not surrounded by people talking in English whatsoever, yet I mostly think in English. It makes no sense to me, but oh well. I've always wondered, but never asked, are Portuguese and Spanish similar languages? Like, do they share words/sounds, that sort of thing? I consider myself to be fairly fluent in English. My thoughts partially switched to it when I was around 17 years old. I had been speaking a little English since I was 3, but I started seriously studying the language only when I turned 16. Currently, my inner monologue is both in English and in my native language. When I'm giving a speech in my head, discussing some concept with myself, I usually think in English. On the other hand, my inner voice uses my native language for the most of the mundane things, like, my exams are tomorrow, yet here I am, browsing Reddit. Also, on some rare occasions, I hear nothing, and just no asterisk what I'm thinking about. Much the same here. Having been fluent in my native language and English since a very young age, it's sometimes even hard to tell which I'm thinking in, but it goes back and forth super easily. And sometimes I'll simply think in ideas, in concepts, and it only forms itself into one of the words I know for it when I actually need to use it to interface with language in some form or way, if that makes any sense at all. I live in America now, fluent in English, French, Bosnian, and Dutch. I always think in French. I was born and raised in France, so it's personally what I find more comfortable. How you learn Bosnian, and why? Loving this thread because it's sort of blowing my mind. Also, everyone in this thread chose to think in English to comment. Edit. Grammar. To be fair, people who browse an English-speaking site are more likely to be consuming mostly English media. A combination of all the languages I speak, though the one I'm predominantly using at that point in my life takes precedence. For example, a thought I had earlier was, what have I forgotten? I do faire qualcosa. I do French, I had to faire qualcosa, Italian, do something, or penso chico, laissez le clé, qui. Which is a horrible Italian-French hybrid that sums up my thinking quite well. Or I might be greeting someone, and my first instinct is to say it French, but I'll have to switch last minute to the language I should be using with them. It's messy and annoying but pretty cool, honestly. I speak multiple languages, and don't think there is one language that dominates my thoughts, to be honest. It's either a mixture of various phrases that express what I'm feeling quite well, or no language at all, more like ideas/concepts/images. Same with dreams. I can remember talking to someone and the topics of conversation, but not the language that was spoken. Language is just the outlet to express things, and if it wasn't somehow relevant to what was happening, I don't remember.